Good, good. Okay, great. Well, thanks all for joining us today for this roundtable discussion on the current state of the semiconductor industry with Congressman Paul Tonko here at the Albany Nanotech Complex, the most advanced publicly owned semiconductor research facility in the nation. I'm Nick Quirquis with the State University of New York, or SUNY. We are one of the organizations leading the semiconductor efforts here in New York State. We are joined here today with regional and national leaders for a conversation around the current state of the semiconductor industry here in New York, the US, and globally. We'll explore supply chain challenges and opportunities, as well as implications for the broader business community and workforce development. This conversation is especially timely as Congress is looking to pass billions of additional investment to support the growth and strength of facilities just like this one for semiconductor R&D and manufacturing here in the US. Now let's get into some speaker introductions. We will start with the US representative for New York's 20th District. Welcome, Congressman Paul Tonko. Next, we have Heather Brissetti, President and CEO of the Business Council of New York State. Our next speaker is David Anderson, President of New York Creates. Mukesh Kure, Vice President of Hybrid Cloud at IBM Research, also joins us here today. In addition, we have John Pellerin, Vice President at Global Foundries. And last but not least, we are joined by Kevin Eunice, Chief Operating Officer and Executive Deputy Commissioner at Empire State Development. We are also joined today by SUNY Chancellor Deborah Stanley. Chancellor, good to see you. And we have SUNY Poly President Todd Larson and Dean Andre Melendez here in attendance as well. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Congressman Tonko, thanks so much for being here with us today. Can you please speak from your perspective on the current status of the semiconductor and chip industry in the US? And from your perspective, your efforts on passing legislation that will invest billions of federal dollars in facilities like this in New York?
Right. Well, thank you, Nick, for leading us in discussion, and thank you, everyone, for making this opportunity available. I think it's so important for all of us in Washington to recognize that the semiconductor industry in this country is a very important one, one that requires deep investments, and we need to understand that from the get-go, that it is a deep investment that needs to be made. It's just the nature of the industry. We've toured and we've understood the price tag on some of the latest generations of equipment. And so we have to approach it in that manner. In terms of the status of the state of the industry in the country, you know, one thing that motivates me to make certain we only expand on what we have today is that over the decades, our order of production of chips has dropped exponentially from 37% in the 90s, now down to 12%. So it's a healthy industry, one that provides jobs from blue-collar trade jobs all the way to R&D and to high science and tech abilities. So it offers great work opportunity, but there is an opportunity for us to grow and feed the world the chips they need, the science and development that they require. In terms of status of where we're at in the House and on the Hill, I have been reminded by many, many of the giants in this room about the precious deadline that is right around the corner. And so I've been named a conferee. I know that Speaker Pelosi understands the importance to my district, but she also knows my background as an engineer and one who's been involved from the get-go in the development of this location. And certainly I think it's the confidence she places in her conferees to get the work done. And I'm a conferee from the perspective of energy and commerce from that committee. There are many committees that are impacted by the conferencing of the bill. ISACA in the Senate competes in the House. Very similar on some parts. In fact, with the semiconductor industry, very similar. It's other avenues of approach, supply chain, that we're trying to address in a, I think, a very focused way. And R&D that I've introduced with some bills that now got incorporated into our overall package of competes. I think it's important for us to invest through the Department of Energy on the next generations of chips, so that we not only invest in the current state of affairs for the industry in America, but to go further and develop the product line with research that will develop the components to get us there and develop the prototypes.
Thank you, Congressman. Great perspective. I'm sure it's very refreshing for the folks in this room to hear you say those words and have that understanding of how this all works.
Just, Nick, if I might, trust me, just the other day, Wednesday evening, we got together as an Energy and Commerce panel of conferees, and all they heard from me was deadline, deadline, deadline. So, thanks.
Thank you. Going to go over to David now. How does Albany Nanotech, this facility that we're at here today, and the various assets and partners that are here with us now around New York State, fit into the future vision of U.S. semiconductor capabilities? Can you speak to that?
Sure, and that's actually a great question. As I look across everybody represented on the panel and people in the room, I think that everyone plays a very important role and fits very well into the vision of the future R&D center for the U.S. And, you know, if we look at New York Creates, we run some of the most advanced R&D for semiconductor in the world, certainly in the U.S. Across the state, as I look to the benefits of working with ESD for many years, what the congressman is doing, Senator Schumer, Governor Hochul, and others, coupled with the infrastructure, the workforce, and the university network across the state, I think New York is clearly poised to support whatever initiatives come to the state and will continue to attract companies to grow the semiconductor industry into the future. And as I look to our industry partners in the business community like IBM, Global Foundries, Tokyo Electron, Applied Materials, you know, with those companies and many others, we have the assets and the talent to bring the industry together. But I think at the same time we recognize that the vision for the future is not a single state or a single organization. It's a national effort, and it requires a nationwide response. And so because of that, you know, New York Creates is really excited to be part of the American Semiconductor Innovation Coalition, ASIC, which is a coalition of partners across industry, university, government, and labs to bring that vision of a national semiconductor technology center to bear. And we want to headquarter it here in New York.
That's great. So more on that later, David. I'm going to go over to Heather now. Let's take a step back. Heather, can you please talk about the broader impact that these ongoing investments in the semiconductor industry will have on the growth of other business sectors in the region and beyond? What segments are some of the biggest beneficiaries?
So I would say my household is one of the biggest beneficiaries, only because my son actually works for a startup company that is making silicon carbide. They are most certainly here because of the decision by the state and the investment from both the state and federal government in ensuring that this industry grows in New York, and I will be parochial about it. I want everything to happen in New York first, and then the rest of the country. But right now, Bureau of Labor Statistics says close to 20,000 jobs in New York State in the semiconductor industry, which I think is a very much an underestimate because how they categorize the industry. I mean, they could be categorizing companies as advanced manufacturing, for example. That would fall into this category as well. So it's jobs, it's growth. If you look at Saratoga County, 25% growth in southern Saratoga County since 2000, largely due to Global Foundries. And success begets success. The more critical mass there is in this sector, the more companies will start and grow around it. And we've seen that in New York to some degree, but we need more and we need to do it faster. As the Congressman mentioned, there's been a decline in the share of manufacturing in this sector globally, and we need to reverse that and bring it back to the US and, like I said, particularly to New York.
Great, thanks, Heather. Mukesh, one of my favorite topics. Can you please speak to the importance of a complementary, thriving ecosystem for domestic R&D and manufacturing of emerging semiconductor technologies, and what steps are being taken now to make that a reality?
Great. First of all, thank you, Congressman, and for joining us, for your strong support for Albany Nanotech, and thanks, Kevin, for all the support from ESD. I will say that this is, I compliment what Dave was saying. This Albany Nanotech complex is the most advanced semiconductor R&D capability for collaboration that exists in the entire country. Unquestionable, just absolutely unquestionable. As we saw, and over the last 20 years, this capability has been built into truly a national treasure. And we at IBM are very proud to be part of this campus, and we generate significant value for our business. Now that said, it takes as you say, it takes a village to build build this industry and build chips. We need it's not just a few manufacturing company and the big names that we hear. You need you need material companies, you need equipment companies, you need lithography companies, resist companies. You need a very broad, semiconductor is a very broad ecosystem. And we are very proud that at Albany Nanotech, we have the entire ecosystem of semiconductor industry that coexist, and we know how to partner, and we partner successfully, and we've been partnering successfully for many years. Now, not only the companies, but universities. This is a unique place where such a world-class university and industry come together. So that's the second part of a very important equation that we have here is the presence of SUNY, RPI, and many colleges, including high schools in the Tech Valley that we saw here. We need workforce. We need engineers and technicians and people who can do different kind of jobs, part of this ecosystem. And that is the type of capability that this facility provides. And that's why we are very proud to be, and we get so much value as a business from this capability. And the last and not the least, state partnership with New York State, partnership, and hopefully partnership with federal will really supercharge what we're doing here. Now, as a second part, what else need to be done? We collectively, as Congressman said, the CHIPS Act, which is, I will say, a first down payment towards bringing manufacturing and semiconductor leadership back to U.S. is very important. And in support of putting our effort forward, we created this coalition called ASIC, American Semiconductor Innovation Coalition, which consists of more than now almost 80 partners. 80 partners consisting of industry, university, startups, nonprofit, national labs. We are all putting together a very strong agenda. That's the next step. We want to put forth building on the nucleus that already exists in Albany, and then growing it to a national level, and not only bringing investment to New York, to Albany, but also making sure that this growth really helps reinvigorate and brings semiconductor leadership back to the U.S. So that's the next step. We are all working together. We are all rolling our sleeves and working in various teams and getting ready. As soon as CHIPS Act is passed, we are ready to go. We can make things operational on this site within 6 months of as soon as the federal government says go.
That's great. Thanks, Mukesh. John, as a leading semiconductor manufacturing company, what does GlobalFoundries see as the biggest needs for the sector as we look to increase our domestic semiconductor manufacturing capacity and competitiveness?
Thanks for the question, Nick, and it's great to be part of this panel with the Congressman and all these distinguished colleagues and people in the audience who I've worked with over my entire career. So it's really a tight-knit community in semiconductors. Well, to answer your question, Nick, from a GlobalFoundries needs perspective, workforce development, I think Mukesh also alluded to it, is key. And we typically think of it as the people that work inside the fab day in and day out. And that's critically important. You need your bachelor's, master's, PhD students who drive the innovations of the technologies that happen inside the factory. You need the operators and technicians that make the machines go 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But there's a tremendous halo effect, and Heather alluded to it as well. You need very, very skilled trades. You have to get chemicals into these factories and the chemicals out of the factories, the purity of the clean room, HVAC systems. So it's really a huge halo effect of workforce development. We typically think of it as what happens in the clean room itself, but there's so much beyond that that's needed, all the way through the very skilled trades level. So that is very key. When we grow and train these people, we need to keep them and keep them in the United States, particularly at the higher education levels. That is an outflow as much as putting manufacturing overseas, putting that intellectual property overseas as well as something we need to curtail, incentivize, and make easy to stay in the United States. So that's another component of workforce development. Another key need for us is the public-private partnership aspect. We want US-based companies through public-private partnership to know that they can have surety of supply, security in that supply, and allows them to advance their products from their US base with longevity and with certainty. So that's that public-private partnership with the government, with private entities is very key. And third is in the area of innovation. You can look at the semiconductor industry as very much the bleeding edge, the 2 nanometer transistors in the EUV lithography machine that we all saw earlier today. But there's a huge ecosystem of semiconductor technology, each of it being leading edge in its own right. RF technologies for radars that you find in your automobiles today, that you find in your smartphones for military communications. Automotive technologies, whether it's for automated driving and safety systems or electric vehicles. There's that space. We are now exploring, GlobalFoundries is making large investments in silicon photonics. So doing computing and information through light in addition to through electrons. So I want people to understand there's a huge array of semiconductor technologies, and we have to make those investments in the United States across that whole spectrum of technologies, not only for commercial interest and commercial security in the US, but also for national security. Military, our defense community uses the entire spectrum of these technologies.
Mm-hmm. So I'm getting a bit of a theme here: workforce, workforce, workforce. And speaking of public-private partnerships, let's go to Kevin. As New York's chief economic development agency, ESD works to attract businesses and grow industries across the state. How focused is ESD on the semiconductor industry specifically, and what message do you think New York's recently passed Green Chips Act sends to companies throughout the country, including the ones here, and around the world?
Thanks, Nick. We have been focused on this industry for a very, very long time in New York. I think there was an assemblyman representing parts of New York who many years ago is now a congressman who was voting and advocating for funding to support this facility when it was a very small, very different facility. But certainly it's been something the 25 years I've been in state government we've focused on here in the campus, but also trying to create industry manufacturing opportunities throughout the state. We just did something called what we call Green Chips, as you referred to. And in recognition of the opportunity that the Federal CHIPS Act that is being advocated by our congressional representatives and leaders, it's still a competition. At the end of the day, we still need to bring those opportunities to New York, right? And so the federal government will act. They'll pass this package to reshore and increase manufacturing opportunities in the US. But we need to take advantage of it for New York, because I too am quite parochial. It's my job. But at the end of the day, I grew up in upstate New York, and I know what a lot of those communities have gone through, and I've seen what an organization like GlobalFoundries has, the impact it's had on its community. And it's about people, and it's about jobs, And so our bill, the green, it's not a bill, it's a passed piece of legislation. It's called Green Chips. And it's a very holistic approach to bringing semiconductor manufacturing and supply chain to New York. So it's an increased ITC, it's R&D, jobs, a number of refundable tax credits. But what is interesting about it is we have sustainability in terms of greenhouse gas emissions as a core requirement of the program. Workforce development is a requirement of participation in the program. Community and economic development commitments is a core requirement of the program. If you want to participate, you have to do those things. And it's the holistic, it's the workforce, it's a continuum, it's having a place that our workers want to stay and live in, right? They come here, we want to keep them here, to your point. So investments in the community, recognizing the opportunity to make it much bigger. And the investments by global, what was your ultimately $14-15 billion investment? That's a massive investment. A 1,200 job commitment turned into almost 4,000 at some point, right? And so we see these opportunities as opportunities to be transformational to New York's economy. And we really, this bill and this legislation, particularly if the federal government is able to pass the federal chips, we will be in a very strong position to capitalize on some really game-changing economic development opportunities. So we're excited.
That's great. I'm excited too. Let's go back to workforce now. Congressman Tonko, we all know that technology is certainly important, but we continue to face a significant talent gap. We were talking about it earlier, across the board, not just semiconductors, at all levels of the semiconductor industry in the value chain, from high school and GED educated folks to postdoctorate equivalents. We want to demystify the fact that you don't need a PhD to work at a facility like this. Can you speak to the need for really building out our workforce development to be more inclusive of the whole stack of skills that are required, and what can be done to address this gap?
Sure. I think, to John's point, that he talked about the trade's impact and the need to have specifically trained, skilled labor is an important aspect. There are nuances associated with semiconductor that require specific training. I think we need to message so that young people looking to move toward a career path understand the opportunities. But on our workforce, Workforce and Labor Committee headed by Bobby Scott, they're doing a good job of paying attention to STEM. We interact with them quite a bit. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee that takes on this issue many, many times in many sessions. I'm also on Science, Space, and Tech that deals with research, and then natural resources. They're kind of a triangle of activity that really speak forcefully to the semiconductor industry. But I think it's legislation that we can advance, and there's a lot of attempts to make certain that we reach the broad audience of potential workers so that we're reaching into neighborhoods that have been neglected for a long time, that we can grow the diversity of the workforce that will be associated with the industry. And I think that some of it even falls into the realm of immigration reform. I think I'm one that really believes we should put, the visa package together with the graduate degree when they're receiving it, and welcome people to stay here and stake their career path here in the U.S. We need to do that. We need immigration reform. We're working on STEM education and science and tech for the specifics of the degree elemented portions of the workforce. But in general, just workforce training and opportunities for everyone.
Thank you. Heather, continuing on the workforce and development theme, as someone who works with a very diverse mix of businesses across multiple different geographies across the state, facing similar human capital challenges that we just discussed, can you talk about what can be done to demystify the perception that the semiconductor industry in New York only benefits highly trained scientists and engineers? And how do we broaden the tent, to the Congressman's point, to try to address this talent gap? So if you can just kind of continue on with the Congressman.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start off by saying that 20 plus years ago, when I was first working in the legislature, I was given a talking point on engineers. And that was that New York State graduates more engineers than any other state in the country, but we have a shortage of engineers in the workforce in New York. That's only gotten worse. To the Congressman's point, kicking people out of the country as soon as they get their diploma is just not a good plan. we need to be welcoming people who we've, just spent significant amount of time educating and upskilling. But first, yes, I think there is a perception that this is an industry that requires, if not an engineering degree, some kind of advanced degree, and it needs to be made clearer to students and to people who aren't currently in the workforce that there is a path to a great job that may require some training. But guess what? There's all kinds of great programs that are out there, and we just finished our Workforce Innovation Awards, and Global Foundries was a recipient because they have a very innovative workforce development program. IBM, which is a member of the Business Council, started a program called the PTech program, where students graduate from high school with an associate's degree, and IBM is in fact a partner in one of these high schools, and the students, when they graduate, are given the option to go work. I mean, it's really homegrown workforce development. There's other arenas as well. The State Labor Department is always looking for opportunities to bring skills training programs to folks who are out of work, who may not realize that it's not going to take an awful lot for them to get the skills to get into a job in this industry, which is growing. And we're in a place in time right now where there are 2 million fewer people in the workforce than there were pre-pandemic. We need to get as many people upskilled and engaged as possible. So there's all kinds of partnerships, public-private partnerships between universities and employers and associations such as the Business Council. We're part of a national survey right now of state chambers of commerce looking at best practices around workforce development, and they include things that folks may not have thought of. I spoke this morning to a private company that does recruiting that is entirely focused on recruiting folks coming out of the military without a college degree and placing them in basically advanced manufacturing. There's enough of that need nationally that that a company grew out of it, which is good economic development. But New York has a military base, and it's not that far. If someone has lived in Watertown for 4 years or 5 years, I would think that moving to somewhere like the Capital Region would seem like moving to paradise almost. I'm not slamming Watertown at all, but I grew up in Syracuse, so weather there is about the same as Watertown, and I do get to say I moved here for the weather. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of opportunity. New York is really at the cutting edge. If you look at what companies like Global Foundries and IBM are dreaming up in terms of workforce development, those are things that can be replicated, and we need to make sure we pay attention and do so.
Great. Thanks, Heather.
Nick, if I might just add, and it's great to see the Chancellor here and reps from the SUNY system, it's important to network with academia too, so that from K through 12, through the community colleges, which are, again, being a great muscle in this whole effort, and into the four-year granting and graduate granting institutions, it's important for us to be in contact with the industry. As I'm so proud of what's happened at Luther Forest with the tech school, which I signed off on when I was at NYSERDA, and to be able to have our tech campus here at this site are golden opportunities, and then to go and visit like a campus like Hudson Valley, where they have advanced manufacturing opportunities, where you're having hands-on training. That's how you whet the appetite and how you develop the disciplines that you require, and how you encourage people to take the steps down this path towards semiconductor and micro technology.
Nick, if I
Please go.
just, I think we've also, notwithstanding our congressional representatives, I think there's also a failure to let our electeds know that these jobs are not just jobs for PhDs. Because that's one of the things we heard quite a bit about in our efforts recently. Who are these jobs going to? And so if they knew what an impact these opportunities would have on entire communities, and if we could better tell that story, I think we might have an easier time, moving things like chips or moving things like green chips in our case. So I think if we could tell that story better, it would be a huge help.
Yeah, great point. Okay, switching gears a bit, going back to David now. So how will shared use facilities like the one pioneered here at Albany Nanotech help the U.S. be competitive and increase our competitiveness in the long run? What level of investments are needed to sustain these types of activities? Can you speak to that?
Well, clearly, I would say nations around the world have recognized the strategic importance of the semiconductor industry. And some of them are quicker than us in legislation to enact the funding, but we're not alone. And, we're competing constantly to develop the next generation of technology to maintain that leadership. So the U.S. really needs facilities like ours that can rapidly commercialize those innovations and bring them into production. R&D investment in the semiconductor industry is high, perhaps some of the highest of any industry. And an example of that is over the course of our history here at Albany Nanotech. Since its inception, the investment here has been over $15 billion. And the result of that is a world-class R&D center that's poised to grow again in our recently announced RFP to build another 50,000 square feet of clean room facility. As a research entity, New York Creates is at, I'd say, the intersection of industry, government, and academia. And so we've really demonstrated success in that private-public partnership that is so important that John spoke about earlier. So it'd be cost-effective and time-efficient. An entity being created like the National Semiconductor Technology Center needs to utilize existing infrastructure and existing facilities like ours across the nation, across the United States, to accelerate the programs that get initiated, ones that are already operating and can hit the ground running with prototype-ready facilities and a highly trained workforce that can bring the objective of recreating or re-energizing the ecosystem for the semiconductor industry in the U.S. So the legislation that Congressman Tonko and his colleagues are working on will be instrumental in forging a path for the U.S. to be competitive for the future. But it's not just about technology leadership. It really provides a path towards long-term economic and national security for the U.S.
Great. Thanks, David. Mukesh, speaking of investment, can you talk a little bit about the scale of IBM's investments in this facility over the years? And also, are there opportunities for startups, small businesses, medium enterprises to get involved in the work being done here with IBM and other partners?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I want to first underscore David's comments that this facility over the last 15 years collectively has invested more than $15 billion. And IBM has been part of this essentially creation from the beginning. IBM, along with New York State and Tokyo Electron, actually started the very initial part of this facility with our first investment in the range of hundreds of millions of dollars. So over a period of time, IBM has invested significant, in the range that we're talking about billions of dollars in this, towards making sure that this ecosystem continues to grow. And collectively, we get benefit, out of it as a partner for Albany Nanotech. In fact, 2 years, in 2019, we launched an initiative on this site called AI Hardware Research Center, where IBM committed to invest $2 billion over 5 years to grow hardware technology that can differentiate in the AI era. So IBM is all in. We are very committed, and with the partnership with the state and many industries, contributing here. Clearly, this site has the most advanced capability. In fact, sometimes I say that the semiconductor technology is harder than rocket science. It is harder. And some of the tools we showed you earlier today, it's more difficult than the tools you will see at NASA. It's more expensive and more difficult. And that's the technology, and we are very proud to be part of that, this ecosystem here. Now, with respect to startups and small and medium-sized businesses, one of the biggest challenges in semiconductor industry is the barrier of entry, right? Everything we talked about is hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, right? If I'm starting a business and I have like $1 million, or even $100,000. How do I start? How do I get into semiconductor industry? Place like this can really help reduce that barrier of entry to small companies and startups. And many of the ideas, really brilliant ideas, come out of these small companies and startups. So, we are very proud that many startups already participate and get benefit from this huge investment that otherwise, they can never get access to. That's the power of this public-private partnership, to be able to enable, smaller businesses and startups and universities to be able to prove out their ideas, leveraging this multi-billion-dollar investment that's here. And as a part of our coalition, the ASIC coalition, we have a very strong startup participation. We have almost 15 to 20 startups who are helping us shape, the agenda at the national level, so that semiconductor becomes a space where startups want to join and grow and become the next IBMs or next NVIDIAs or next global foundries of the world.
Thanks, Mukesh. I know we're running tight on time. Want to go back to John quickly. Can you speak to the impact of the chip shortage on global foundries and other domestic manufacturers, and what you are doing to weather this shortage and avoid future supply chain issues?
Well, it's an interesting worded question, because as a chip manufacturer, you ask what is the impact of the chip shortage on a chip manufacturer, but it's a legitimate question. Clearly, we were talking with the congressman as we were doing the tour. The equipment we buy to process the wafers have chips in them. And of course, so that's a constrained supply chain. Also, many other components that go into those processing tools are subject to the supply chain issues. So we've seen lead times increase by about double to get process equipment in. And we are in an active phase of expansion of all of our facilities around the globe, including in Saratoga County. So we are affected by the chip shortage. Some would say we are participants in the chip shortage. And as I said, we are expanding our capacity around the world to address that chip shortage. But there was certainly a COVID dynamic at play. But we were already on a steep increase in semiconductor demand before COVID. Just look at the semiconductor content in automobiles, going from a few $100s to several thousands of dollars. The advent of Internet of Things devices, all the devices you have in your homes, that's just exploding. So we were already on an upward trajectory. COVID threw a wrench into that. People cut their orders back, slashed inventories because they weren't moving their own product. And that just caused a huge whipsaw effect across the whole economy, and certainly within our industry. So it has affected us in terms of our ability to bring more capacity online. We are doing everything we can to expand within the footprints we have. We are eagerly awaiting that final signature to allow us to expand even more and to be able to bring more capacity online. The other thing that this chip shortage has done is to cement, you could call it, part of it is public-private partnership, part of it is also to shorten the supply chain. Typically a semiconductor manufacturer would have several steps in between before it got to the final end user, like an automobile manufacturer. That is now compressing quite a bit as a result of the chip shortage, and those relationships are becoming much closer and tighter between the manufacturer and the ultimate end user. So I think that's another dynamic that this chip shortage has changed, and I think it's a very positive change.
Congressman Tonko, do you have any other thoughts on the chip shortage from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that obviously supply chain issues are front and center, a great concern. That's why I think our CREATES Act, the House version, in response to the issue, is so important in that it's holistic and it's a comprehensive strategy that includes building within the Commerce Agency a supply shortage focus with a division that will collaborate with other agencies and bring together the forces that will measure the extreme supplies out there that are in shortage, look at some of the shock systems within it, and come up with a plan working with the agencies to target dollars and resources ahead of the curve so that we're responding to that. I think it's so important that we do it in such a comprehensive way. Now, I would encourage people who are here today or joining us on live stream to contact our office so that I can share, my crew that's here today can share with you contact information for senators that are key as conferees that may be opposing this because it's growing government. We're not growing government, we're collaborating it, putting it into a model that makes more sense and it's more responsive. Others are also opposed to my piece of the Competes Act that would invest in R&D, that would perhaps address supply shortages in a different way. And I think that if you assign DOE the resources and the responsibility to come up with that next generation of chips, that's an important aspect also. So, you know, these are elements that are being fought over, and I just think with more public awareness and more public push, we can get that done and hopefully seal the deal, because the CHIPS basics are pretty much in agreement, but we need to come to terms on some of the surrounding issues that still are being considered out there, and at initial blush being refused just because of its investment. I can tell you in general there are some that are opposing the bill before it's even finalized because it's more spending. I call this investment. And sometimes the cost of not investing is greater than that cost of investing. And you know, it's all about putting the legislation together in a way that's most meaningful. And I'm looking at Mike Fancher, who always used to help me in that regard, and I thank him for that coaching in my assembly days. But thank you, one and all, for all that support, because really, we have to speak out on different components in this bill, because denial gets rewarded simply by, you know, silence is complicit. So we need to have people speak forcefully to some of the components in the bill that we could share with you that are very important to the future and to responding to this supply chain issue.
Thank you, Congressman. Well, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us, but it's good to know Congressman Tonko, Senator Chuck Schumer, and other leaders in Washington are out trying to get legislation passed that will interject billions of additional dollars into the R&D and manufacturing base here in the U.S.
Hey, Nick, if I could just acknowledge
Sure.
and let Manesh know that I caught the line, $53 billion is a down payment. No pressure. So.
Thank you. Yep. And the CHIPS Act that was mentioned here today will provide billions of dollars to address the challenges and opportunities that we discussed. It's important that these issues around U.S. semiconductor R&D and manufacturing don't get lost in all the noise, as all the devices and things we use on a daily basis all rely on those chips. Facilities like the one here at Albany Nanotech and the organizations represented here today represent the equipment, know-how, and talent to help the U.S. execute on its need to strengthen our semiconductor capabilities. I would like to thank all of our panelists who've joining us here today: Congressman Paul Tonko, Heather Brissetti, David Anderson, Mukesh Kure, John Pellerin, and Kevin Eunice, and everyone else who joined today's roundtable discussion. We look forward to continuing the discussion on this very important topic. Thank you.